Okay, hi. Look, this presentation's probably going to make me about the most unpopular Aussie in the place, but that's fine. I'm usually relatively unpopular. And I'm very plain speaking. And I certainly never back away from an issue that needs to be addressed. And look, some of what I say just might be challenging, and you don't have to agree with what I say. It may be just a little controversial. But it's something that does trouble me, and it's something that's not going to get better unless we, as a group of trainers, lead auditors, audit managers, do something about it. And we need to start doing something about it now. So just a couple of things to introduce me first. Oh yeah, and by the way, I did do a subtitle to this presentation because I thought it needed one, which is why do so many auditors demand their auditees met levels of compliance well beyond the requirements for that organisation. This is getting to be more and more and more a problem, that people are inventing stuff that is not in the standards, it is not in the requirements, and yet they're saying to people, you will do this. And I'm going to show you a few case studies that will indicate that. You know, the audit needs to be based on consideration of risk for the client's process. Okay, the auditor does do a risk assessment of the audit themselves, but they might want to consider what's the risk within the client's process, and giving them stupid and ridiculous findings, and lots of them, is not going to make a point to anybody. And the auditor is there to add value, not to destroy the business. Your job is there to say, hey guys, this is what you need to do to be compliant. And if you read the way I've written my non-conformances, you will understand how to address them. And if we're not doing that, and if we're not working with our clients, they're paying us. You know, we seem to forget that. Our client is paying us to do the audit one way or the other. Somebody's certainly paying for me, so how about we be professional about it? And that is where I come from. So having upset everybody, I'll just keep going. So, look, if you look at all of that stuff, yes, I'm an educator, and it's fairly embarrassing. Aussies, we don't like putting our stuff up like that, but I do have all those quals. But it doesn't make me an expert. I don't pretend to be an expert. I don't need to be an expert because I have subject matter experts who can do that for me. More importantly, I need to be understanding the client's management system. I don't have to know every single process within that organisation to know whether it's working, because I should be, if I'm auditing it properly, I should be seeing that. But if I don't understand the organisation, so I do make sure I understand the organisation, I do make sure I understand its context, and I do make sure I understand that whole area in which they're working, but I also rely on the people who are actually running the business. They'll tell me very quickly if their system's not working. So, as one of the things that we have to do in Australia, we don't have as many auditors, we certainly don't have the ability to bring people in from all overseas because it's damned expensive to get in and out of Australia. So we have to rely on our own abilities, and most of us have to work in a number of different areas. So I work in everything, as you saw, from mining, explosives, dangerous goods. As one rude person once said to me, oh yeah, you sort of basically work in everything that'll kill you. Yep, it's always been something I've really liked working in, understanding what are the risks, and not just the hazard risks, the safety risks, but what about the security risks? That's another side of security people don't think of. How do we keep all the stuff where it's supposed to be without it heading off in the bush? And by the way, our biggest threat is actually from our local bikers, pinching explosives, not from anybody else. It's quite an interesting concept. Now, this is where I live, just down there in sunny Perth. You'll be pleased to know it's warmer in Perth. It's going to be warmer in Perth or tomorrow morning or night than it is here. And that's our winter. And then I work up here, and I work up there, and I work there, and I work over here, and I go over here, and I go right around the country. And by the way, that big bit of desert in the middle, I work in that bit too. Somebody said this morning, they drive for 5 hours. How about 18 hours to go and do an audit, driving? And I had to drive because I only have one plane once a week in and once a week out. And the only way to do it is to drive. So it makes for an interesting life. But we are the most remote capital city in the world. We're proud of that. Here's the weird part. I'm actually closer to Indonesia than I am to the capital of Australia, which is over in Canberra. It's actually easier for me to do any work over there. Oh yeah, sorry, I did forget. The Kiwis are over here, by the way. The New Zealanders. They're over here. I work there as well. The great thing about when you land in New Zealand, by the way, in Australia, as we fly over, we see sheep. If you're lucky, because they're camouflaged in the red dirt, because they're red as well. But when you land in New Zealand, the first thing you'll see is all the sheep are white. Seriously, it's a beautiful green road, and then there's green pastures, and there's all these sheep, and they stick out little balls of cotton wool. And that's about the only thing that is in New Zealand. Lots and lots of sheep. And lots of houses. But it's an interesting country. The company that I audit over there is a geotechnical company. And every house, if you want to build a house in New Zealand, you've got to check about what its stability is for earthquakes, etc. Fascinating. I wouldn't live there. I kind of like the earth to move when I want it to, not when it wants to. Now, let's get into this. Look, we all know not every organisation's the same. You can't use the same techniques for every organisation. Look at the different industries: gold mining, iron ore mining, oil and gas exploration, drilling, surface, underground, construction, domestic construction, mining construction. Those are all areas we have to work in. Minor and major electrical. Water treatment. We don't have enough water in where we are. You can't drink the seawater, so we have to make our own. Those are all areas that I'm called upon, and the rest of the guys from Compass Assurance, we're called on to audit. We do metal foundries. When I go back, I'm doing a major metal foundry. Specialist metalworks, doing formworks, all that sort of stuff. We do businesses from what we call the mums and dads, 1 or 2 employees, up to 1,000, couple of thousand. And we have to make sure that when we're auditing those fairly, because is it fair for me to expect the mums and dads to be meeting the same criteria as the 2,000 employee company? Should they have the same size management system? Or should we be considering what's the real context of this? And the trouble is, what I'm seeing more and more is everybody's trying to apply one set of rules, and it's the set of rules from the highest common denominator. They're doing no risk management on it, no risk assessment. Oh, you will meet this requirement. Do you know the worst part about the whole thing is? It's the major organisations, the major companies that are actually trying to enforce this. And it's something that we need to be considering as auditors. Do we actually have the guts to say to them, guys, you've gone way outside the standards. We are certifying and auditing to standards. We should be working to that level, not to some level of compliance that you've thought up because it makes you look good. Because it's expensive, and you'll see later on just how expensive it can be. By the way, I have a real bad habit of never pressing the stuff, so everybody's staring at me going, what's he doing? And that's me. Okay. But let's just see, what makes a good auditor? Well, that should be 19,011, says auditors should be ethical, open-minded, diplomatic, observant, perceptive, versatile, tenacious, decisive, self-reliant. We should act with fortitude and be open to improvement, culturally sensitive and collaborative. Perfect human beings, really, aren't we? Well, I am. Don't know about you lot. But seriously, absolutely seriously, how many times do you see auditors who are writing non-conformances within the first couple of hours of an audit? How on earth can you do that? It's just not possible, because you wouldn't have the evidence, and yet I see it time and time again. They make up their minds just like that. Oh, yep, don't like the look of his face, that's it, non-conformance. How many auditors actually take the trouble to get to know the client? Why don't they spend 10, 15 minutes sitting with the client, maybe 20 minutes, and their management team at the start of the audit and get to know them? Maybe share, here's scary, what about sharing a little bit of yourself with them so everybody settles down? Who has been audited by somebody else? How did you like it? It's challenging, isn't it? Guess what? That's how they feel. And that's something we need to be aware of. You know, how many times do we see young, inexperienced auditors trying to negotiate findings? See that? Oh, look, you know, if you do this, maybe it might just be a minor non-conformance. It's missing completely, but they're still saying, oh, we can make it a minor non-conformance if you just write this now. That is not auditing. That's bordering on consultation, if not dishonesty. See, my view is this. Good auditors... Oops, why's that just gone backwards? Oops. Oh no, there we go. What does our training tell us? Good auditors need to add value to the auditees' programs. Oh yes, in operations they certainly do. 8 hours a day we get to audit, do we not? So we've got 8 hours in that day, and for however many days the audit's going to take, to give ourselves to that organisation, to give our abilities, our knowledge, our understanding and our competence to that organisation. I mean, you know something, we are actually paid quite well. And a little bit of giving a little bit of ourselves and working with our clients to give them the best outcomes. What's wrong with it? Think about it. The audit is about the auditee and their needs, and it's certainly not about what the auditor wants. Have you all heard that one before? And yet, why are we still seeing it time and time again? You know, we need to understand the subject in the auditee's business. You know, we actually do need to take that time. What about some research before we go there? Who are they? What's the website look like? What are their key products? Who are the key people in it? You know, that 8 hours that we get, yeah, well, that's the ones that people see, but what about the time we spent preparing for it in the first place? And taking along the same checklists and the same audit plans that were used everywhere. That is not doing the job that you're being paid for. And yet, I see it time and time again, they get given one set of checklists and that's it. You know, we need value, we need honesty, we need integrity, we need competence. And that, funny enough, comes back to training. So there was actually another presentation in one of the other areas about training, and didn't actually go to it. But if you think about that, are we doing ourselves, are we making sure that our young auditors actually know what they should be doing? You know, we ask the right questions. and we listen to the answers. We use it the right way. Okay, if we go into a bit about 19,011, the use of this guidance differs depending on size, level and maturity of the organisation's management system. I mean, we've all seen this before, haven't we? There's nothing new up there. But we're kind of not seeing that all the time. And yet the standards written in, if you look at 9,001 and 14,001, 18,001 and 27,000, what's that key bit that says? Context of the organisation, isn't that first at the start? So shouldn't we be considering the context of the organisation when we're actually getting ready to audit them? Or are we just coming up with these simple tools that could be applied to anything? We're doing half a job. And unfortunately, I'm seeing this more and more in Australia, and I can see a few heads nodding, so I think you're probably seeing more of it in your own areas as well. So what do the standards say? Well, you've got 9001, documented information. The extent of documentation can differ from one organisation to the other and all that sort of stuff, and we know about the size of the organisation. And what's documented information anyway? I am still getting auditors who say, oh, they've still got to have paper documents. Why? What is documented information? It can be, like somebody else had this in their previous presentation, it can be paper, it can be electronic, it can be video, it can be pictures, it can be photographs, it can be all sorts of stuff. Does it provide you some sort of information? There's one company, a major hospital group in Australia who does a great thing. They've actually done little, like manual chart, they're like little booklets. And the employees can just look at it and go, okay, that's what it should look like when I've finished. And they do the job, and that's what it looks like when they're finished. Is that a procedure? How many of you as auditors would consider that a procedure? Or documented information? Yeah? Of course it is. Another one, they do videos that they can call up any day and just to remind themselves what they're doing. Documented information, exactly. And yet we're still getting auditors who say, oh, no, that's got to be written down. You're going to see in a minute real information from an audit of a company that has a single service. And yet, the auditor demanded that they had procedures documented to cover a whole lot of other services because they might be involved in it one day. And look, let's just remind ourselves, 14,001 pretty much says the same thing. It's applicable to any organisation regardless of size, type, blah, blah, blah. 18,001, same thing again, isn't it? This isn't new stuff. It's been around for years and years and years. And look, we can just look through all of those. I'm just showing off all the ones I know, I mean, why not? Got the opportunity. So what's the problem? Because this is what it's really, really about. In Australia, and I'm sure the rest of the world, governments are under some pressure to stop spending lots and lots of money and get rid of a lot of their employees. So they're having to outsource a lot of stuff or rely on external certification. And in fact, in Australia, in certain states, for instance, in the traffic management field, you won't get a traffic management operator's license if you don't have quality and safety, and the safety can either be OHS 18,001 or it can be ASN ZS 4801. But if you haven't got those, you will not get a license. In one of the states, I'm not going to mention which one, all of the paramedical type companies, sort of private ambulance, but it's not quite that. They do a lot of event management and stuff like that. Their audit, their quality and safety audit, then has to be reported to the regulator, and the regulator, Department of Health, then uses that as their compliance requirement. So more and more you're seeing government bodies actually starting to rely on the standards and compliance with standards to meet their regulatory requirements, or at least part of it. And it's not a bad way of doing it because they put the onus in the payment. Who pays for that audit? Who do you think? Hey? The client, yeah. So the government's just saved itself a fortune on not employing any auditors. Do we feel used? Not really. There's a growing demand for independent auditors because of that. And they need to be trained. And here's the problem. You can go and do a lot of training courses for auditing in Australia. They're all over the place. But then you talk to people who've attended those courses and they'll usually come and be, oh, I hated it. Oh, it wasn't good, etc. I'm actually quite fortunate. I can honestly say I've never had somebody give me a bad feedback from the courses that we've run. And they're PECB ones. There's my little plug. How about this? Some courses don't even mention 1911. And in fact, I asked one certification body director once, why don't you think it, why don't you have it in this hour? Don't use it. Excuse me? Isn't that one of the principles for good auditing? It's actually not a bad guideline, isn't it? If you read it properly and apply it properly. And unfortunately, I'm sorry to say, we're getting a resurgence of the authoritarian auditors in some areas of our industry. I thought we'd got rid of them, but they're coming back in again. And I have to admit, it's tending to be the younger auditors. Whether the auditors, this is the old bloke talking now, but I'm sure we were never that young. Certainly not when we became auditors. So I just want to, here's my take on it. You've got the police inspector. Now these quotes, by the way, are all real quotes. This was one in the middle of a PCB training course that I was running. And this particular person stood up when we were doing towards the end, and we've been talking about the roles of auditors, etc. And I was just saying, so what are your future plans, etc.? And they said, oh, well, I'm going to be working for the government. And it was a major government agency. And they said, well, we're going to have the power, and you need to do what we tell you if you want to pass the audits. And I'm looking going, pardon? They said, well, we are going to, and unfortunately, they were going to end up as being my auditors. And I just pointed out to them, I said, you'll never audit me because you can't. You've been on my training courses. But they were actually saying, well, we have power. It's not about power. It is not a power job, auditing. The bully, I love the bully. Not a lot, but this was one needing an explanation. I sat there and I nearly fell off my chair. I was doing the witness audit on this, and this came out of his mouth, and I didn't know what to do for a minute because I was just stunned. I thought I'd actually misheard him. Needing an explanation of a non-conformance shows you're not ready for certification. Where does it say that? Look at the standard. Does the standard say anything about that? When I read his non-conformance, I was looking at going, what on earth are you talking about? I couldn't understand it. I love the commander. He's brilliant. I decide what applies to your business. That's my job as an auditor. I'm not joking. And this was to a company that makes high voltage equipment. And we were doing a safety audit. Do you think it might have been a good idea to get that audit right? I love the consultant's friend. I mean, I've been a consultant, I've done all those things, but this gave me the horrors. If you don't use a consultant, it's unlikely you're ever going to be certified. And he followed that with it. I can point you to a couple of good consultants. I'm just going, no, you can't do that. The obfuscator, we're seeing more of this, and I don't know where this is coming from. I think it might be the internet, I don't know. People are relying on it too much. Your system's way too simple, everything must be addressed in full. Can't we do exclusions? Doesn't it say we can risk manage our risk and we decide what applies to our business? And the worst case is that the auditor might question and say, well, how come you've said that this doesn't apply? If they give me a decent explanation, it's a conformance, isn't it? And then we get this sort of stuff. Oh yeah, but you've only got an 18-page manual. Since when has the size of the manual got anything to do with it? And this guy scares me. The best thing you can do is take it apart and start over again. And that was said to a company that had been previously ISO 9001-2008 certified. And he said that to them when he was doing the gap for 2015. He said, oh, no, you don't understand. You have to take the system apart and start again for 2015. It's such a complex document. In one fell swoop, he did more damage to ISO 9001-2015 than any man I know in history. So here's case study one. Now, obviously, I'm not going to tell you who they are. These are all, it wouldn't be fair for a start, and they wouldn't like it. They've both the case studies I've used were approached and asked, without naming them, do they mind if I use their cases? And they both said quite happily, yes, please. And one of them said, oh, no, we'd love it. And I've promised I'm going to get them a video from this and send it to them afterwards. But I'm still not going to use their names, but they'll know who it is. And these do illustrate the points quite well. First one, family owned and operated. There are 4 employees, mum, dad, daughter, and 1 casual employee. Their job or their service is traffic management. So it's road traffic management. So they do, if there's emergencies, if there's fires or anything like that, or if there's any road works, etc., they do all look after the whole control. So the lollipop guys, but there's a lot more to it, and it's quite heavily regulated. The legal requirements, they are required to have ISO 9001 and AS/NZS 4801 or OHS 18001. It really doesn't matter which. But they must have those, and they must maintain and retain that certification. And they must prove that they've been audited at least every 12 months. And no certification, no license, no proof of surveillance or recertification, no license. So they just take it away again. And they must pass every audit. Now here's the problem that they had. At the audit, they were advised that they had not addressed key issues. All right? So they were told you had failed to address the key issues of the standard. And here are the issues that he said that they had failed. And by the way, I haven't done it quite verbatim because it would have taken way too long. But they had failed to identify the development of a high-risk permit system, including confined space work. Now, these guys are traffic managers. So when they questioned, well, where's this confined space come from? They said, well, sometimes you may have to work in a tunnel or in a hole. And they're going, why would there be traffic inside a tunnel that we're managing? Because you always are required to put your signage and blocks outside the tunnel so people don't run through it in the first place. And secondly, why would we be going into a hole in the road? We're there to control the traffic. It gets better. They had no work at height system, right? When they challenged that, he said, yes, but you have to work on bridges. They're at height. Do we need a work at height permit to drive across the bridge? I don't know. Any of you guys from the States, do you have work at height permits for getting on bridges? Hot work permit, including welding and molten liquids. So they challenged that one and they said, well, you're working on the roads, and when they're working on the roads, they're often pouring hot bitumen and spraying hot bitumen. You do not put the traffic management people in the middle of the work. They're about 100 metres either side of it to warn the traffic before they get there. They're not exposed to it. And there certainly never would be. They had failed to address the hazards risks for asbestos management and disposal, biological hazards and electromagnetic radiation. To this day, I can't work out where the guy's head was at. When they said it, they said, oh, you know, we have a lot of live sheep and cattle transport. So they said, well, there'll often be trucks going past. Yeah. So, again, problem. You know, and there was sort of a whole lots of other stuff that came out. How did they barricade their work site? The traffic management, they're not barricading it. They're actually letting the vehicles through in a controlled manner. And what did they do about wild animal attack? That one actually had me laughing. I was just going, you are kidding. Because, you know, we're in Australia. What do you think? Some feral kangaroo was going to attack him? Just crazy. This is a sort of really bad auditing that gives auditors a bad name, unfortunately. I mean, I seriously was starting to wonder what this guy was on when he was doing the audit, but sadly, it was absolutely true. So the outcome of this one, and this is the sad part. Remember I was talking before about cost? They completely, because they didn't know better and they needed their certification for their license, and they had to, they completely revised the quality and OH&S management system, and they were certified. They actually paid a consultant to do a quick job, and he charged them $15,000 to a consultant. Quite frankly, they should have known better and done something about it. But these guys needed this. This was their living. Because it was only implemented this about a couple of years ago, and it was brought in not well. So there were a lot of companies suddenly going, oh my God, we're going to lose a license if we don't get certified in the next few months. They've now got 8 high-risk procedures and documents for the above issues. They've never been used and they're never going to be. And they've got 74 documented procedures to manage a system supporting a single product or service. But they need to rely on an external consultant to manage their whole management system. Is that scary? How much do you think that's costing them per year for compliance to what is actually a simple system? And here's the thing, there are actually already mandatory codes of practice that they are required to follow that are issued by the Main Roads Department, and there is a standard for the signage. So they can't deviate. It's incredibly controlled, and each of the traffic managers who design the traffic management systems have to be licensed individually as advanced traffic managers. And they've done a whole heap of training and certification and assessment. Is this getting scary? And yet this is what we see when bad auditors start putting thoughts into people's heads. And in Australia, we don't have anywhere else. It's not easy for them to turn to anybody else. We did actually take over the certification of this company, and the tears in their eyes when I said, you do realise you've got a system that is way, way, way too complex for your organisation. And we said, here's some opportunities for improvement. And they basically read, remove this, remove that, remove that, remove that. You don't do it. But I didn't put it in that thing. It is suggested that you do a risk assessment and consider those procedures that are applicable to your organisation, and then manage the rest. I'd never told them what to do with them, but it's funny, they were missing the next time we did their audit, which was kind of nice. Now, next one. This one's it would be funny if it wasn't quite so serious. So this one, it's a single owner company. It's literally just, so that's why in Australia you can actually have a proprietary limited company that is one director, and they're everything as far as the business is concerned. So it's got one owner, and he employs, so there's himself, they've got a coordinator who's a specialist coordinator, and they've got a clerical person because there is a lot of paperwork in what they do. And here's what they do. They pack and they unpack sea containers. with very fragile equipment for exploration. Okay, this is actually the company that packed. You all know about flight MH370, the Malaysian Airlines flight that disappeared. And Fugro had to go looking for it. These guys actually had to pack the containers that they went taken out to the ships. And they've got to be packed in a specific way so that when they get them onto the ship, they can be unpacked in the right order whilst everything else stays immobile. So if they get any rough weather, nothing's going to move. So it's a very complex job in some ways, in that everything has to be tied down, but it must meet the criteria. And they're working with the organisation or say that can't go on top of that, but that's got to come out before that, and that one's got to be over here. And they have a lot of other issues because they have biosecurity and quarantine regulations. The biosecurity, not so much when it's going offshore, it's when they bring it back and it's been down at the bottom of the ocean, it's all over the place. And then we've got the whole quarantine regulations anyway, because we're a bit funny. Australia's an island and we don't want things that shouldn't be there on it. And their certification, this is contractual. When they negotiated their contract with Fugro and a few of the others, the requirements were that they retain 9001, 14001 and OSHS 18001. And that was to meet contractual obligations for their clients as well, so which they were prepared to do, and they knew it was going to cost them some money. Okay, so all they do is receive goods into a yard, and their yard can take about 10 containers at a time. If they've got to do more, they'll just do 10 at a time and then send them out and so on. Okay, so there's nothing else. They're out in the middle of nowhere. Right, they're in an industrial estate, for want of a better word. All they do is they put it in the container using a forklift, then they tie down to the instructions of somebody else. And then that person checks it. Okay, so it's not exactly rocket science. Seriously. So here's what their auditor came up with. Lack of reportable. This is directly from his finding. Lack of reportable and non-reportable instance and change of office resulted in the reporting and recording not being to required standards. Pardon? They hadn't had any instance. Have a look at the size of the organisation. And by the way, can anybody tell me what's a non-reportable incident? Where did that come from? I don't know. How do you record a non-reportable incident in the first place? So they did challenge that one, okay? And his answer was, you're in the transport industry, and everybody knows that that's the most dangerous one of the most dangerous industries in Australia. And we know that you all hide your accidents. Pardon? Where did that come from? Number two, the company, and this is what he wrote, the company comprises of 2 employees at the moment. However, as a minimum, HSE hazards need to be discussed and identified in conjunction with the neighbouring businesses. 14,001 says that you should let your neighbours know if you've got any issues, correct? What about the safety ones? I was just looking at this going, pardon? And did I remind you, I told you that they're out in the middle of nowhere. What are they going to affect? A couple of kangaroos and maybe a wild cat? You know? He expected them, and his statement was, you need to go to every business in the area and discuss the biohazard, marine and quarantine issues, because ISO 14001 says so, and so does OSHS 18001. I'm confused. Can anybody answer that question? What on earth was he talking about? You know, this is the sort of stuff we're seeing. And if this lot didn't scare you, the company has not obtained accident or incident information from their neighbours. Now, I'm not sure if that would offend the privacy laws, but it certainly offends me anyway. What right has any business got to the information, the accident and incident information of the company next to them? He said that they should be involving themselves in their investigations. So he's making an immediate assumption that all the businesses around there are having accidents and incidents. And there's nowhere in the standards that say you do anyway. And yes, I have picked some of the worst ones, guys, so yes, because it makes a point. Control of document procedure could not be located in the system documentation. This is a mandatory procedure required by ISO 9001. Notice it was a 9001 2015. Does it say that? Does 9001 2015 say you've got to have a document procedure? No, it doesn't. It does say something about having documented information. And by the way, they did actually have that, but he didn't like what they had because he didn't reckon they were actually documents. What he actually said was, sorry, I've just lost my place here for a sec. There we go. This is what he actually said. They had a flowchart, so a document flowchart, and they'd actually taken screenshots of what they wanted the history page to look like and what they wanted the footers to look like. And they had a numbering algorithm, so when they went to enter it into their document register, it gave them the document number. But that wasn't a procedure, apparently. This last one, I just love it. Read it carefully. What's wrong with that? Current emergency preparedness plan need to be prepared and tested in combustion with the business sharing the premises. What on earth are you going to do? Set the bloke next door on fire? I'm not joking. That is word for word out of the finding. How much damage has this guy done to our industry? Certainly one company's completely lost faith in the certification of standard certification. And by the way, this guy wasn't a new auditor, he's been around for a while. But he will tell anybody who listens, the difference between the old standard and the new 2015 standards are so complex, it requires a complete rewrite of the system, and it is his duty as an auditor to ensure that they get it right. The outcome, the company disputed the findings, but they were told it's not negotiable. And he actually sat there and said, we're going to appeal it. He said, oh, it won't matter. My company knows that I'm an expert in this. You haven't been doing this for long enough. Sorry, but and by the way, he's not the first one I've heard say that either, by the way. They approached a consultant with logistics expertise who determined the majority of the HSE QMS was not applicable to the business. Lovely bloke. I'd like to shake his hand. Actually, I did when we went and audited them after they came to us. And they did the right thing. They had done it all and they said, oh, can you come and we need to get re-audited. And this guy was brilliant. He addressed the stuff that was required and got rid of all the other stuff. It was completely revised, simplified, mainly by removing non-applicable processes and defining only the applicable requirements. Remember, we've had a few people now have said we should just be addressing the issues that require in the context of the organisation. Well, he actually did that. What a surprise. And the management system that he's produced, I have to say, is actually one of the best. And if they keep up what they're doing, we are likely as an organisation, we are allowed to nominate people for things like the WorkSafe Awards, which is quite a prestigious award because they've done it right. Now, these aren't, conclusion soon, these are not isolated instances of questionable audit practices. And, unfortunately, when you're doing these presentations, you can only pick and choose. And yes, they're some of the more blatant ones, but they make the point. But there is a resurgence in the use of certification bodies and external auditors. And if that's the case, then we need to start getting this right. And if we're not careful, then the auditors are going to be once seen as the ogre. And remember, that used to be the case. Oh, the auditor's coming. Oh my God. Hide. Who doesn't follow the safety rules on the site? Get them off the site. They can come back. Put them on a week's leave. All that sort of stuff. Shouldn't be happening. Shouldn't need to happen. And here's my view. It's up to every lead auditor, trainer, certification manager, and all the other interested parties within our industry to get this right and to work on it. Seriously. We all need to be challenging our own decisions and challenging the decisions of our teams. If you're the lead auditor and somebody's giving you non-conformance, ask them to explain it to you. Go through it. Make sure it makes sense. Put your brain on, your auditor brain on it and go, well, if I saw that, what would I think? I mean, we have this thing, there's a program called, by a bloke called, it's Adam Hills, if anybody's heard of him. He's a comedian, and he has this thing with what would Putin think? Well, I'd just say, what would you think? What would anybody, what would another manager think if they saw that? Challenge the decision of your team, make sure that everybody agrees, and seriously challenge it. It doesn't mean you've got to end up with some long-winded fight over everything. Just, are you sure? Tell us what made you believe that that finding is correct. Ask ourselves the questions. Do our findings add value to the organisation, or are we just being a pain? Are we nitpicking? Could this just be an opportunity for improvement? Is it really a non-conformance? Is this going to hurt their business? Yes, in which case we should do something about it. What does the standard actually say? Not what did they think the standard said. What does the standard actually say? Have they read it? Have they looked at what they've written and compared the two and gone, yep, that meets those requirements, or that doesn't meet the requirement? Where is the bit that's missing? Do I, as an auditor, really understand their business? Do I understand their processes? You won't be, if I come and do your dangerous goods stuff like explosives and munitions, guess what? Up until a year ago, I was a licensed shot firer, and I've done an awful lot of shots. So I kind of understand that stuff. But there's other stuff that we have to audit, and you usually have to have a second auditor or a subject matter expert with you because I need them to explain it. It's just the way the world is. This is one a lot of people struggle with. Is my way the only way, or does the auditee understand their business better than I do? Because maybe that they're doing it one way. You don't have to like it, but if that works for their business, and if they can show you it works, what right have I to say to them, oh, you need to change? Do they? We shouldn't be telling them things. I'll let him get the photo of the slide. Have I explained my findings properly? That's the one that I actually find people struggle with. You finish the audit and then you'll get a phone call a few weeks later, we don't understand this non-conformance. That shouldn't be happening because I obviously didn't take the time to explain it to them properly at the closeout meeting. Or we've written it differently to what we explained. And that's an important part. Have we made sure it's understood? And there's so many more, guys. There seriously are so many more, but I think you're getting the picture. We can make the difference between continual improvement for the benefit of the business and that poor business having problems. That's how serious bad auditors can be. If we fail, we run the risk of a loss of confidence in the auditing process, especially in a maturing market. And you know something? Our market deserves to succeed, but we're not going to do much for ourselves if we don't start getting it right. And I can only plead with everybody here. We need to take these things on board, and we need to be telling everybody else this. Let's get rid of the cowboys. Let's start working together to get and to add value to the businesses that we work with. So thank you, guys. Any questions? Thank you.